The blood on the snow told a story Silas Boone didn't want to read. Dark crimson drops led from the treeline to his barn door, where something had crawled inside seeking shelter from the Wyoming winter. His weathered hand gripped the rifle tighter as he approached, boots crunching through the morning frost. 20 years of solitude had taught him that uninvited visitors rarely brought good news. But nothing had prepared him for what lay curled behind the hay bales. She couldn't have been more than 17, her long black hair matted with dried blood and pine needles. The torn doeskin dress revealed a deep gash across her thigh, and the way she held her side suggested broken ribs. Even unconscious, her face carried the strain of pain and fear. This was a Lakota girl, far from any reservation, far from safety. Silas stood frozen, his mind racing between decades of ingrained prejudice and the undeniable sight of human suffering before him. The newspaper headlines screamed about savage raids and the need for protection from the Red Menace. But this wasn't a warrior or a threat. This was just a wounded child who had somehow found her way to his door. The memory of his wife Emma's final moments crashed over him like a winter storm. Her fevered whispers begging him to get help, the helpless feeling of watching life slip away while he was too far from town, too late to save her. He had carried that weight for 20 years, the crushing guilt of inaction when action might have made all the difference. He couldn't do nothing again. Setting the rifle aside, Silas knelt beside the girl and gently checked her pulse. Weak but steady. The wound on her leg had stopped bleeding but needed cleaning and stitching. Her ribs would heal with rest, but infection could kill her if he waited. His hands, rough from years of ranch work, moved with surprising gentleness as he carefully lifted her unconscious form. The journey to his cabin felt longer than usual, each step measured and careful. Inside, he laid her on Emma's old quilted bedspread, the one he hadn't touched in years. The irony wasn't lost on him. This bed had seen so much death, and now maybe it could witness healing instead. As he heated water on the wood stove and gathered his meager medical supplies, Silas found himself talking to the unconscious girl. Maybe it was 20 years of silence finally breaking, or maybe it was guilt demanding confession. He told her about Emma, about the fever that took her, about how he had failed to act fast enough. He spoke of the isolation he had chosen, the visitors he had turned away, the community he had abandoned. When he began cleaning her wounds, she stirred and opened dark eyes filled with terror. She tried to pull away, but pain kept her still. Silas held up his hands, showing her the clean cloth and warm water. He spoke softly, though he doubted she understood English. Instead, he let his actions communicate his intentions. Slow movements, gentle touch, careful attention to her pain. She watched him with the wariness of a wild animal, ready to flee despite her injuries. But as minutes passed and no harm came, some of the fear faded from her eyes. When he offered her water, she drank gratefully. When he brought warm soup, she accepted it with trembling hands. As evening fell over the Wyoming mountains, Silas found himself sitting vigil beside a stranger who had stumbled into his carefully constructed isolation. Outside, the wind howled through the peaks, but inside the cabin felt different somehow. The oppressive silence that had been his only companion for 2 decades had lifted slightly, replaced by the soft sound of another person breathing. The girl slept fitfully, occasionally murmuring words in her native tongue. Silas dozed in his chair, rifle across his knees, unsure whether he was protecting her from the world or protecting himself from whatever consequences this act of mercy might bring. Neither of them could have imagined that by dawn, the hills around the ranch would echo with voices that would change everything they thought they knew about trust, healing, and the possibility of redemption in the loneliest places on earth. Dawn came slowly to the Wyoming mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and rose. Silas had barely slept, startling awake every time the girl shifted or made a sound. When pale morning light finally crept through the cabin windows, he found her sitting up in bed, watching him with those dark, intelligent eyes. She said something in Lakota, her voice barely above a whisper. When he shook his head to indicate he didn't understand, she pointed to her chest and said clearly, "Winona." Then she looked at him expectantly. "Silas," he replied, touching his own chest. "Silas Boone." She repeated his name with careful pronunciation, and something about hearing it spoken aloud after so many years of silence made his throat tighten unexpectedly. How long had it been since anyone had said his name? Even the occasional supply trader from town just called him the hermit up the mountain. Winona attempted to stand, but pain shot through her injured ribs and she gasped, gripping the bedpost. Silas moved to help her, but she flinched away from his touch. He understood. Trust would have to be earned slowly, like coaxing a wild horse to accept a bridle. Instead, he brought her more water and watched as she assessed her surroundings with the careful attention of someone accustomed to danger. Her eyes lingered on the rifle mounted above the fireplace, the heavy door bolt, the single window that offered both light and a potential escape route. She was calculating, planning, staying alive the way her people had taught her. When she accepted the water, their fingers briefly touched, and Silas noticed how small her hands were, how young she really was. Emma would have been about her age when he first met her at the church social in Sheridan. The thought brought both comfort and pain. As the morning progressed, communication became a careful dance of gestures and simple words. Winona pointed to her wounds and then mimicked falling, showing him how she had been injured. Through her pantomime story, Silas understood that she had been running from men on horseback, white men who had chased her through the forest. When her horse stumbled and threw her, she had crawled for miles before finding his barn. The knowledge that bounty hunters were in the area sent a chill through Silas that had nothing to do with the mountain cold. He had heard the stories, the government payments offered for captured Indians, the ruthless men who made their living tracking human beings like animals. The girl wasn't just wounded, she was hunted. When he brought her breakfast, cornmeal porridge sweetened with the last of his honey, Winona ate slowly, savoring each bite. She caught him watching and said something in Lakota that sounded like gratitude. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. It was small, tentative, but genuine, and it transformed her entire face from wary stranger to simply a young woman grateful for kindness. That afternoon, while she rested, Silas found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He tidied the cabin. He swept the floors, organized his few belongings, even shaved his graying beard. When Emma was alive, he had taken pride in their home, in making it a place of warmth and welcome. Now, with someone else sharing the space, he remembered what it felt like to care about such things again. Winona watched his efforts with curious eyes. When he struggled to fold her cleaned and mended dress properly, she gestured for him to bring it to her. Despite her injuries, she showed him the correct way to handle the soft doeskin, her movements reverent as she touched the intricate beadwork her people had created. As evening approached, she grew restless, moving carefully to the window to peer out at the darkening hills. She spoke urgently in Lakota, pointing toward the mountains, her expression troubled. Silas followed her gaze but saw only the familiar silhouettes of pine trees against the star-filled sky. But Winona saw something else, something that made her press her palm against the cold glass and whisper what sounded like a prayer. She turned to Silas and spoke slowly, mixing English words with Lakota, trying to make him understand something important about the hills, about her people, about something that was coming with the dawn. That night, as they settled into an uneasy sleep, Silas found himself listening more carefully to the mountain sounds. The wind through the pines, the distant call of a night bird, the settling of snow on the roof, all familiar sounds that had been his only companions for 20 years. But now they seemed different, charged with possibility and meaning he couldn't quite grasp. Winona lay awake too, her breathing shallow with pain and anticipation. She knew something Silas didn't, something about the ancient ways her people used to communicate across vast distances, something about the sacred songs that could carry messages from heart to heart through the mountain air. Neither of them slept deeply that night, both sensing that the morning would bring more than just another sunrise over the Wyoming peaks. The first voice came with the dawn, floating across the mountain air like smoke from a distant fire. Silas jerked awake in his chair, hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. The sound was unlike anything he had ever heard, a low, haunting melody that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Then another voice joined it, and another, until the hills around his ranch echoed with an ancient song that made his skin prickle with unease. Winona was already awake, sitting upright in bed despite her injuries, her face turned toward the window with an expression of profound reverence. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she was smiling, her lips moving silently as if she knew every word of the distant chant. "What is that?" Silas whispered, his voice hoarse with sleep and fear. "Are they coming for you?" She looked at him with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom beyond her 17 years. In careful, broken English mixed with gestures, she began to explain. The songs were not a war cry or a threat. They were sacred chants of gratitude, sung by her people to honor someone who had shown kindness to one of their own. Her grandfather was out there, she said, and her cousin, and the medicine woman who had helped raise her after her mother died. Silas stared at her in disbelief. "They're singing about me?" Winona nodded, then struggled to find the English words to make him understand. She pointed to herself, then to him, then to her heart. "You save Winona. You no kill. You heal." She gestured toward the hills. "They sing to say thank you to man with good heart." The realization hit Silas like a physical blow. For 20 years, he had lived in isolation, convinced that the world was a place of cruelty and indifference, that human kindness was a luxury he could no longer afford to believe in. But these people, these strangers whose daughter he had helped, were singing his praises to the morning sky. As the sun climbed higher, painting the snow-covered peaks in brilliant gold, Winona began to hum along with the distant voices. Her voice was clear and sweet, despite her injuries, and the melody she sang seemed to wrap around Silas's heart and squeeze gently. He found himself thinking of Emma, of the hymns she used to sing while working in their small garden, of the way music had once filled their home with light and hope. "Teach me," he said suddenly, surprising them both. "Teach me what it means." Winona's eyes widened with wonder and something that might have been joy. Slowly, painfully, she began to translate fragments of the song. It spoke of the great spirit that connects all living things, of the sacred responsibility to help those in need, of the healing power that flows between open hearts. As she spoke, her voice grew stronger, more confident, as if sharing her culture was giving her strength. The chanting continued for nearly an hour, and during that time, something fundamental shifted inside Silas Boone. He began to understand that his 20 years of isolation hadn't been protecting him from the world's cruelty, it had been cutting him off from its grace. Every sunrise he had watched alone, every meal he had eaten in silence, every night he had gone to bed without hearing another human voice, had been a choice to remain broken rather than risk healing. When the songs finally faded, leaving only the whisper of wind through the pines, Winona turned to him with an expression of deep sadness. "Tomorrow, I go," she said simply. "My people wait. But they not come close. They respect you, your land." Silas felt something crack open in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced since Emma's death. It was loss, but it was also something else, hope, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding that letting people into your life always meant risking the pain of letting them go. That afternoon, as Winona's strength returned, she began to prepare for her departure. She braided her long black hair in the traditional way and carefully examined her mended dress. With materials from Silas's limited supplies, she began creating something, her fingers working with practiced skill despite her injuries. "What are you making?" he asked. She held up a small piece of carved wood, barely larger than his thumb. Using his knife in infinite patience, she was etching intricate symbols into the pine, patterns that seemed to dance and flow like the songs from the hills. "For you," she said. "So you remember." As evening approached, they shared what would be their last meal together. Silas had opened his final jar of preserved peaches, a luxury he had been saving for no particular reason. They ate in comfortable silence, no longer strangers but not quite friends either, something deeper and more mysterious, two souls who had briefly touched in the vast wilderness of human experience. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled its ancient song to the moon. Winona smiled at the sound. "He sings too," she said. "Everything sings if you know how to listen." As they prepared for sleep on this last night together, both knew that tomorrow would bring endings and beginnings in equal measure. The songs from the hills had changed them both, opening doorways in their hearts that could never quite close again. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. Silas woke to find Winona already dressed and standing by the window, looking toward the hills where her people waited. The carved wooden symbol lay finished on the table, its intricate patterns catching the early light like tiny prayers made visible. She moved carefully, her injuries still tender, but determination strengthened her steps. When she picked up the small wooden carving, her dark eyes met his across the quiet cabin. Without words, she pressed it into his weathered palm and closed his fingers around it. The wood was warm from her touch, smooth from hours of careful work. "What does it mean?" Silas asked, studying the flowing lines and symbols that seemed to dance even in stillness. Winona smiled, the same tentative expression that had first appeared when she trusted him enough to accept his food. "It means bridge," she said carefully. "Between worlds that think they different, but really same inside." She touched her heart, then his. "Same here." They shared a final breakfast in companionable silence, both aware that words would only make the parting harder. When she refused his offer to escort her to the hills, Silas understood. This was something she needed to do alone, and her people needed to see that she was walking away freely, not as a captive or a burden. At the door, she paused and looked back at the cabin that had sheltered her, at the man who had risked his safety and solitude to help a stranger. In halting English, she said, "My grandfather, he say white man with good heart is rare like blue buffalo." "You are blue buffalo, Silas Boone." After she left, walking slowly but steadily toward the treeline where shadows might have been waiting figures, Silas stood in his doorway for a long time. The cabin felt different now, not empty but expectant, as if it remembered what it was like to be a home instead of just a hiding place. Later that morning, he found her final gift. While he had slept, Winona had carved the same flowing symbols into the wooden frame of his barn door, the weathered planks now bearing permanent testimony to their brief but profound connection. The carving was small but unmistakable, etched deep enough to last through many mountain winters. As the days passed, Silas discovered that solitude and isolation were not the same thing. He still lived alone, still worked his small ranch without help, still went weeks without seeing another human soul. But the silence had changed. Where once it had been the heavy, suffocating quiet of a man hiding from life, now it was the peaceful stillness of someone who knew he was part of something larger. He began talking to his animals again, something he hadn't done since Emma died. He found himself humming fragments of the melody Winona had taught him while doing his chores. On clear mornings, he would look toward the hills and remember the sound of voices lifted in gratitude for simple human kindness. The carved symbol lived on his kitchen table, and sometimes he would hold it while drinking his evening coffee, remembering the feel of trust growing between two people who had every reason to fear each other. It reminded him that mercy was not weakness, that opening your heart always involved risk, but that the alternative was a kind of living death. Spring came early that year, and with it, changes Silas couldn't have imagined. A supply trader brought news that bounty hunters had been arrested for illegal raids on reservation land. A letter arrived from the territorial government, asking isolated ranchers to report any signs of criminal activity in their areas. Slowly, carefully, Silas began to engage with the wider world again. One morning in April, he heard something that made his heart race with recognition. Distant voices carried on the spring wind, not the sacred chants of gratitude this time, but something lighter, more joyful. Children's laughter mixed with women's voices, a sound that spoke of life continuing, of people who had found reasons to celebrate despite hardship. He never saw Winona again, but he didn't need to. The bridge she had spoken of existed now, invisible but real, connecting his solitary mountain ranch to a vast network of human hearts that beat with the same hopes and fears as his own. Every sunrise brought the possibility of unexpected kindness, every sunset carried the promise that mercy given would somehow return, transformed and multiplied. Years later, when other travelers occasionally sought shelter at his ranch, Silas would welcome them with the same quiet grace that had once saved a wounded girl's life. The carved symbols on his barn door told a story that needed no translation, a testament to the truth that healing and hope could grow in the most unlikely soil. And though he remained the same solitary rancher the world had always known, Silas Boone never again woke to absolute silence in his heart. In the whisper of wind through pine branches, in the call of birds at dawn, in the distant voices of wolves singing to the moon, he heard the eternal song that connects all living things, the melody Winona had taught him to recognize. The loneliness was gone, replaced by something infinitely more precious, the knowledge that he was never truly alone. What did you think of this story of unexpected connection in the wilderness? If these characters touched your heart the way they touched mine, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment when a stranger's kindness changed your perspective on life? Share your story with our community. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more powerful stories of human resilience and connection. Your support helps me bring these forgotten tales of the American frontier to life. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most profound journeys happen not across vast distances, but across the small space between two open hearts.